Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Phil Leahy, or well, good afternoon here in the UK. Good morning in the US. I know it's 11 a.m. Eastern time and a little bit later the further west you go. So here's a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about. This will only be about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Jake for a demo of our publisher dashboard, because this, although this webinar, certainly my introduction is going to be somewhat general in nature, it definitely has a focus on publishers and how publishers can engage with federated access management in general, and OpenAthens software and services in particular. So I'm going to be looking at the access management toolkit, something called RA21 I'll be talking about briefly. Why federations? Why do we have this ridiculous terminology? Why peer-to-peer SAML connections are hard, and then just a little bit about how OpenAthens is expanding around the world. So what is the access management toolkit? Well, there are a number of different. This is a rich ecosystem, and librarians have become very adept at drawing together disparate tools in order to provide a coherent service for their patrons, for their users. Two of those are vendor supply credentials, i.e. where the publisher is providing usernames and passwords. That can be a single username and password for an entire organization or an entire institution. The user has no interest or no investment in those credentials, so they are highly likely to be shared. And referral URLs, well, that's really just a case of having a customer specific URL that can be literally used anywhere on the internet, and this is really what we call security through obscurity. Providers of access methods of this order are really banking on a fairly low probability that these two methods won't be shared. So although they did work up to a point back in the day, I think we're beginning to see a movement to more advanced technologies. Peer-to-peer SAML connections are one options for those. For that, I'll be talking a little bit more about those earlier on, a bit later on. IP recognition, again, something that's been used by publishers for certainly since the late 90s, early 2000s. We do believe it's kind of beginning to become to the end of its usable life, with just the different ways that organizations are now using cloud services. There's a product called Zscaler, which I'm hearing many references to these days. Organizations, they just can't use IP recognition when it's offered by publishers if they're using that kind of service. And federated access management, and that's really what I am here to talk about today. So briefly, a small sidebar, RA21. So as the quote there says, publishers, librarians, and consumers are all coming to the understanding that authorizing access to content based on an IP address no longer works in today's distributed world. Now, I could spend the next hour talking about RA21. Suffice to say, if you want to know more about RA21, this is a tiny URL link to a blog called Scholarly Kitchen, which has several articles that discuss RA21. But for my money, this is the most comprehensive and the most clear-headed. There are many myths around what RA21 might mean, both for librarians, institutions, and for publishers. This article really gets to the heart of a lot of those key issues. If there are questions about RA21 coming up at the end, I'll be happy to deal with those, but definitely worth checking out that blog posting. So what is federated access management? Well, this little graphic will just quickly take us through the typical scenario. You've got an institution on one side and a content provider or a publisher on the other. And then these two words, authentication and authorization, they can be, often people don't necessarily know how they differ. Well, authentication is really when somebody asks the question, tell me who you are. So you need to prove your affiliation with an organization, typically in this space. And also it can be information about you as a user. What are your interests? What are your specialities, etc. And then the content provider or the publisher, they will then make an authorization decision based on the information that is sent from the institution to the content provider. And this is a typical workflow. So the authentication piece, the user will log in at their home organization, their home institution, in order to verify that they do have the ability to do that. And then many publishers will take that incoming verification that the user has successfully logged in at the home organization as sufficient proof that they are a member of that organization, and maybe 90 to 95% of content that's sufficient for a publisher, because they take the pragmatic view that his history students are not typically interested in physics journals, etc. So they kind of self-selecting. However, as that graphic there suggests, it can get a bit more granular than that. So if a publisher has either premium content or content that is restricted access for other more, for example, sensitive medical images or what have you, the institution can send additional information, non-personal information, but for example, as this example here says, just saying, well, my institution is verifying that I work or study in this department, the publisher can potentially make use of that information and provide access to, for example, additional content or restricted content on the basis of that. And this is typically then what the publisher will see. Now, this is just I realize this is potentially just a bunch of gobbledygook and a bunch of code and what have you, but the two attributes that I have circled here, this is really what goes to the heart of some of the RA21 objections. Some people who are concerned that RA21 will lead to the leakage of personally identifiable information about their users to publishers. Now, you can see there in the rest of that table, you can see my email address there, for example, but that's only because my fake institution has decided to release that information. The two attributes that I've circled there, the top one is my unique identifier. So there's clearly no way a publisher will be able to determine my name, where I am in the world, which organization I belong to, simply from that piece of information. In addition to that, that identifier is different for every publisher I access. This is how SAML works. It changes the unique identifier for every single publisher. So two publishers couldn't, and this has been a common criticism of RA21, two publishers could not get together and compare IDs like this because they would be different for the same user. And then the one at the bottom that I've ringed there, that's typically called scoped affiliation, and that really becomes so everything on the right of the @ symbol, that really helps the publisher determine which organization a user belongs to, and then they can work out which subscriptions the user should see accordingly. But everything before the @ well, can be that, as I said, that granular information. It can be just member is typically basically sent for typically sent for all users at an institution, but some organizations again get a bit more cute with this, and so they are sending staff, student, alumni, etc. So yeah, the options available to organizations to pass limited information about users is really increased by the use of SAML. So on to federations. Well, why is a federation involved? Well, firstly, SAML is not plug and play technology. You could task 5 developers with going to build a set of SAML tools, and they would not all operate in the same way. So certainly the academic councils here in the UK and similarly the Ivy League universities in the US, they got their collective heads together and said, right, we're going to advise our our member organizations to deploy SAML in this way, in step ways, and they decided to call these things federations. So they apply technical infrastructure and policy frameworks. The lawyers got involved as well, typically, because an organization had to verify who it was to a publisher with a sufficient level of insurance. So there was a whole legal framework. But the key thing about SAML in the way that OpenAthens and like-minded organizations use it is that it's a deploy once, reuse multiple times model. So an institution can connect to any publisher that is a member of its federation, but more importantly for the focus of this webinar, a publisher can deploy once and connect to any participating institution within that same federation. And here's how that contrasts with peer-to-peer SAML. So I've got a bunch of fake publishers down the right-hand side and some genuine OpenAthens customers down the left. And publishers are quite adept at building peer-to-peer SAML connections. It's safe, it's secure, it's the industry standard in terms of encryption about user attributes and what have you. But it requires significant technical effort and expertise, not only at the publisher side, but also on the institution side as well, the consumer's side. And moreover, they're only good for one customer or one bilateral relationship. So you pretty soon get to a point where a publisher is managing a number of parallel single-use connections for all the customers that want to connect via SAML. But then the same becomes true for their customers as well. And as I said, this requires specialist and advanced technical knowledge on behalf of institutions who might not always be well resourced and equipped to employ such expertise. And so you end up with a web of parallel, single-use, peer-to-peer, expensive to maintain and build connections. But where federations bring efficiency to that same level of technology is that they allow both publishers and their customers to register in a federation once and then reuse that for everybody who is agreeing to adhere to those same rules and regulations. So here's a map of where OpenAthens is operating around the world right now. So what we've done is we've taken that federated model, that distributed federation model, and rather than it being confined to national borders, so here in the UK, we've got the UK Access Management Federation. In the US, it's called InCommon. The Japanese Federation is called Gakunin. We've taken that same technology and we have made it available to any organization anywhere in the world that wants to participate in our federation. And the upside for publishers, is, as I said, is that they get to deploy once and reuse that technology for customers anywhere in the world and in any sector, not just the academic and research sector, which is where all this stuff started, but also in commercial, well, as the next slide shows, commercial organizations, healthcare organizations, government and defense, the US Air Force, Army and Navy are using us, the UK National Health Service and healthcare organizations right across the US, in Australia and in Europe as well. So, and we're all playing by the same rules here. So the barriers are as low as they possibly could be, and the opportunities for engagement are about as high as they possibly could be. So this is really what OpenAthens is bringing to the SAML Federation world. So I'm going to pause there. Here are a couple of events that we are exhibiting at later this year. I'm going to be at ALA in Washington, DC towards the end of June. It may well be that Jake, who you were just about to hear from, may be accompanying me. We're also exhibiting at MLA in May in Chicago. But without further ado, I am now going to hand control to my colleague, Jake Wiles.
Great, thanks, Phil. I'm just gonna grab up my screen. There we go. Yeah, as Phil was saying, I will be at ALA, so look forward to seeing anyone there. So my name's Jake. I'm a technical solutions expert for OpenAthens, and I'm here to talk about OpenAthens Keystone and give a brief tour on the publisher dashboard. Some of my slides will be a bit similar to Phil's, but I'm guessing it's not too bad to explain SAML again because it can be quite complex. So what is OpenAthens Keystone? OpenAthens Keystone is our solution to bridge the gap between OpenID Connect, aka OIDC, and Security Assertion Markup Language, aka SAML. SAML, as Phil was explaining, is a security standard used by a wide range of publishers and service providers. Keystone sits in between these two technologies to allow OIDC to receive SAML attributes. So I'm going to take a look at how this works. So Phil was explaining the federations in his presentation. So I'm just going to kind of go over that again and explain who everyone is in the federation and where that all sits. So your customers, or in SAML terms, the identity provider, are institutional organizations such as universities, schools, hospitals, corporate companies, etc. These institutions use standards-based identity management software, such as OpenAthens, to allow their users to access protected content. A lot of these systems use SAML to do this. So you have the protected content on your application or website that your customers need to access. Your application would also need to speak SAML to be able to interact with these customers. So although, as Phil was saying, that SAML is secure, widely used, and it's a great way to access online protected content, it could be pretty hard to install, understand, and maintain. For example, we've seen use cases when the SAML expert for a publisher leaves, therefore there's no one around to support their SAML server. So the SAML server basically becomes this black box and causes all sorts of problems and unnecessary avoidable issues. It also makes it quite hard to onboard new customers when you lose your SAML expert. OpenAthens Keystone aims to fix this by hosting the SAML part in the cloud for you. That way you get to enjoy the benefits of a SAML system without having the drawbacks of maintaining it yourself. So let's talk a little bit about OIDC. OIDC is a protocol that's lightweight, fast, and easy to install. It also works on a huge variety of different platforms and programming languages. OIDC is required if you want to use OpenAthens Keystone. We've got an interactive guide on how to install OIDC inside the publisher dashboard itself, and I'm going to demonstrate that later on. If you're currently using OIDC on your existing application, then you're already compatible with OpenAthens Keystone. So as Phil was mentioning, this is a one-to-one direct connection. So this is a high-level example of a direct connection to an institution. The institution sends SAML attributes between itself and OpenAthens Keystone. These attributes describe information about their organization and the user account itself. The attributes being released to Keystone depends on what the institution chooses to send to you about their end users. And if they've already logged in, that's all handled on the institution's end. These are when Phil was talking about the attribute statement in one of his earlier slides. OpenAthens Keystone will read these attributes and translate them into OIDC claims. The OIDC claims are then sent back to your OIDC client on your application. You can then make a decision on whether or not a user should be allowed access or not. Each party has SAML metadata and would need to exchange it prior to this example to establish a direct connection between each other. Direct connections work great when you only have one customer. However, it's more realistic that you've got multiple customers and therefore multiple metadata files. This is where federations come in. So federated access is the concept where registered publishers and institutions put their metadata in the same place. This way, publishers and institutions do not need to establish lots of one-to-one connections, and then they don't have to maintain them. So we run that global federation, the OpenAthens Federation, and all OpenAthens customers get access to our federation. It's possible with OpenAthens Keystone to connect to other federations as well. So if you wanted to connect to the In Common Federation or the UK Federation, etc. I'm now going to show you what OpenAthens Keystone actually looks like and take you over some of the features in the dashboard. So this is my dashboard and my test account. And this is the place where you can register and manage your applications. This page gives you a quick rundown overview of your account. There's lots of in-depth options that make Keystone quite flexible, but today I'm only going to show you some of the key features like setting up a new application. So with that being said, let's take a look at my example application. This is the screen you'll see when you first create an application. This is where you can upload logos and set a description for your application as well. Your logos and description actually show up in the OpenAthens identity provider dashboard for your institution customers. So if your institution customers are using OpenAthens, then your application is going to show up in that catalog and it'll look really nice. There's also some tabs here that allow you to configure the OIDC settings. I'm going to take a look at the Getting Started tab in the top right. So the Getting Started button is an easy way to help you install OIDC if you do not already have it installed. First of all, you select what type of runtime you'd like to install OIDC on. So in this example, I've chosen the Apache web server. The dashboard will then provide you with a step-by-step guide on how to install OIDC on Apache. The guide will contain code snippets that are pre-configured based on your application. So all the examples you're seeing here, like the OIDC redirect URI and client ID, that's all pre-configured, so you don't have to mess about with configuration files. So we support these kind of interactive guides for Apache, Java, .NET, and PHP. However, OpenAthens Keystone supports any OIDC certified client. So if you use a Python web server and have OIDC client installed that's certified, then you can use that client to talk to Keystone. So next of all, I want to talk about the Connections tab. So this is kind of the SAML side of things. The Connections tab will show you what federations you're connected to and federations you could potentially connect to. You can also add the one-to-one direct connections to your customers using the additional identity providers, but you'd only need to do a one-to-one connection if your customer doesn't belong in the same federation as you. So it is possible to have multiple applications connected to a single connection. So that means if you're already live with an OIDC application and wanted to add another application to the same federation, you can do that here. You don't need to make multiple connections or register in the same federation twice. You would just make one registration and then connect your applications to the connection. And that's it for me today. Thanks everyone for attending. I'm going to move to the next slide now about questions and hand back to Beth.
So we haven't actually had any questions, which I'm going to take as a good thing that both Phil and Jake have covered covered all the information that perhaps was needed. Unless anyone has any, we'll sort of wait a couple of minutes, perhaps if anyone wants to get any questions now. And obviously with the follow-up email tomorrow, when you receive that, there will be contact details for you to contact us and bounce any questions to, and I can obviously direct them to Phil, Jake, or anyone else in the organisation that I feel would be able to help. So yeah, unless Jake and Phil, you've got any other things, I think we might be able to wrap this up sooner than later.
The only thing I would say is if you're frantically typing out a question in the chat box, having been in this exact same scenario myself, do just click on the raise hand icon, just so that we know that you're
that's a good idea.
that you're trying to do something. But yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes. I guess the only thing that I would add is that, you know, we've talked a lot about technologies this afternoon, or today I should say. We've talked about SAML, we've talked about OpenID Connect. The approach that we are taking with Keystone, and the reason that we're using OpenID Connect as the transport layer, if you like, or the relaying party is sometimes referred to, is that SAML is pretty much it's the best part of 15 years old now, if not more. It's heavyweight enterprise level technology, and the technology world has moved on in the meantime. And so if you've ever clicked on a pay with PayPal button, or if you've ever signed into any kind of web service with your Google account, that's OpenID Connect right there under the hood, doing all the heavy lifting. So so the value these days is not so much in SAML technology specifically, but it's in the SAML attributes, or at least the user attributes that are encrypted via in SAML, and which is still the industry standard in terms of encryption encryption of user information. But publishers don't want to install that code in their servers anymore. It's just there are far more lightweight options around. So that's why we've gone down the OpenID Connect route.
Cool. Thank you for the further information, Phil. There hasn't been any hands up that sort of would let us know if anyone has any questions. But yeah, obviously, as I said, we'll always ensure that they get followed up. Any information you have. Oh no, sorry, there is a question that's literally just come in. Okay, so no, it's not a question, it's just a note to us, obviously. Yeah, thank you for your feedback with that. Just saying, obviously, great presentation. So in regard to next stages, so we do have a follow-up survey which will pop up as soon as the webinar is exit. If you do have 5 minutes, and not even that, it's probably about 2 minutes to spare, please do contribute towards the survey. It really does help us, give us an insight. We really value the feedback and obviously the time you could contribute towards attending these webinars. And yeah, as both Phil and Jake have mentioned, we've got the events coming up within the next couple of months. If you're there, it'd be great to meet you, or if you've got existing relationships with our colleagues, come and talk to us. We can provide the information that you need. And yeah, book a meeting if you'd like, just to ensure that you get time to meet the colleagues. So thank you very much for attending this afternoon, and yeah, thanks to Phil and Jake also for your help, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.